Hi, I'm Brian Donovan from the Hudson Republican Committee, and today we have a special guest. Senator Ayotte from Washington is here. Thank you very much.
It's great to be with you, Brian.
Very
Appreciate
good.
it.
Very good. Well, you know, Senator Ayotte, Hudson is a Republican town. I just looked back at the 2010 elections, and you won 71% of our vote. You actually had a 3,000 vote majority coming out of Hudson. So, you know, the folks of Hudson are limited government, lower taxes, local control in favor of folks that support the Constitution and are willing to defend it. And I think you do a fantastic job on all of
Well,
those.
thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
I know time is going to be of the essence here, so we're going to jump right into it.
Sounds good.
We have a few videos of you last week on the floor of the Senate, and we're going to start with the one on the medical devices tax, and we're going to come back to it. So, Scott, if you want to start that video.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Amendment 297 that has been brought forward by my colleague, Senator Hatch from Utah. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this amendment that establishes a reserve fund to repeal the onerous medical device tax. In fact, the medical device tax is nearly a $30 billion new excise tax on medical devices. It took effect in January 1st to pay for the president's new health care law, and it affects everything from orthodontics to the most complex life-saving medical devices. Just to name a few: joint replacements, knee braces, pacemakers, visual aids for sight-disabled people, things that help people who are ill, life-saving devices, technologies that people need, and this tax just burdens all of them, and it will increase health care costs.
Senator, as we just saw, that medical device tax is a tax that you're fighting for. We know that, obviously, the Senate really hasn't had a budget in the last 4 years. Now they're working on one. You're working...
Well, no, and exactly. The last 4 years, the Senate has not passed a budget, and so the Democrats have been in control. I serve on the Senate Budget Committee. We actually went through the budget markup in the past week, and there was a budget resolution voted on early in the morning, about 4:30 in the morning, last Saturday morning. And so that budget resolution, the House also passed a version, a budget resolution. But within that, one of the debates that came up was on the medical device tax. The device tax is a 2.3% tax on revenue of all medical devices. Anything from, you think about orthodontics to the most complex life-saving medical devices. And it's a real big problem because the tax was put in when the president's health care law was passed to fund that bill. And so here's what it means for New Hampshire and for this country. What it means, we have many medical device companies here in New Hampshire, almost 50. And in fact, I've visited many of them. I was just at one yesterday. And that tax comes right out of their research and development. Some are being forced basically to lay some people off because of the medical device tax around the country, some of the medical device companies. And unfortunately, what it means is this tax, which is not a tax on profit. So if you're a startup, it's essentially a tax on innovation because it's on your revenue, whether you make a profit or not. We're going to have less investment in this country on medical devices. And at the end of the day, for the American people, we want the new companies, these companies have very good jobs here in New Hampshire and across the country. The new medical devices to come here in this country instead of Europe or other countries. We want them first so that the American people can get the best medical treatment, the best life-saving devices, and if you have any kind of medical condition, you want to be able to make sure that the medical device you need to treat yourself and your family, that you get it here first in the United States of America. That's why this tax never made sense. And by the way, the other issue with this tax is who's going to pay it? Consumers. We end up paying more for health care. I thought we were trying to reduce health care costs. So I've been a strong supporter of repealing this tax from the beginning. I've been fighting for this from day one since I got elected to the Senate. So that's what you heard me talking about on the Senate floor. I felt very passionate about this. Last week on the budget resolution, we had a non-binding vote. So it's because the budget resolution is non-binding. And the vote was overwhelming. A lot of Democrats now switched their positions and voted to repeal the medical device tax. Now what we need is a real vote. So we need a real vote in the Senate on basically a revenue measure. It has to start in the House. The House will pass it, and then Harry Reid needs to put it for a vote on the floor so we can repeal this tax that's raising health care costs, basically putting Americans out of work, and finally, we want the best medical quality devices here first.
Right, right. And any tax that's not on profits is actually a sneaky tax, because that means even if a company is not profitable, you still have to pay something in that.
Oh, right. So think about a startup. So you're a brand new company, you got a great idea. I can treat this condition, I can save this life. But before you're even making a profit, the government is taking 2.3% of your revenue. So you reduced investment in research and development. How do you as a startup get things going when this tax hits your bottom line before you ever make a profit?
Right, it's going to stifle innovation.
Totally.
And that's really the foundation of healthcare.
It's the foundation of healthcare. It's also the foundation of entrepreneurship in this country, is innovation and people with great ideas that how do we save a life? So this tax never made sense from the beginning.
Right, right. Now the next video is a topic, and I think you coined the phrase "missile to nowhere," which is kind of interesting here. This amendment aims to eliminate $381 million in funding on the Medium Extended Air Defense System and restore those funds into the Department of Defense operation and maintenance, their general budget, I guess, basically.
For things that our troops can use. So this MEADS program, this missile program, really goes back to Ronald Reagan once said, "There's nothing closer to eternal life than a government program." And what happened is we've already spent between 2004 and 2011 $3 billion on this program, which was intended to replace the Patriot missile system. And it was overrun with costs. The development was not working in terms of the plan of being able to do what it was intended to do, and the Army finally said, we don't want it. And yet we continued to put money in it. In fact, here we are facing sequester, where there are real needs that our men and women in uniform have, and yet the appropriators continue to put $380 million for a program that we're never going to get a result that our troops can use in the theater for. So my amendment was straightforward. I call it a missile to nowhere because it is a missile to nowhere. It's never going to work. And so it was $380 million that we would cut from the continuing resolution and then apply those funds to operations and maintenance for real needs that our troops have instead of wasting it. Right. And so, I'm fighting this fight in Washington because I brought this amendment. The Majority Leader, Harry Reid, blocked me from having the amendment, and I certainly fought very hard to get it. I was blocked from having it, but then about 1 o'clock in the morning on the budget resolution, I did get a vote on my amendment to the budget instead of to the continuing resolution, to the budget resolution, and it passed with 94 votes.
Oh, so okay.
So, except the problem is this, Brian. They wouldn't give me the vote on the continuing resolution because that would actually cut the money. On the budget resolution, it's non-binding, but it shows that had I gotten my vote on the continuing resolution, I would have gotten overwhelming support. They knew it. That's why they wouldn't give me the vote. It wasn't just Harry Reid, it was appropriators trying to protect local interests instead of looking at the good of our country. And why are we wasting taxpayer dollars? So missile to nowhere example of where, absurd that we would spend this money on something our troops can't use.
Right. And actually, we're going to take a look at that video right now.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Madam President, in a minute, I'm going to call up an amendment that I've been speaking about on the floor the last few days, and essentially this would be an amendment to the bill that's pending before the Senate right now with the continuing resolution and appropriations bills that would strike $380 million of spending for a MEADS program, which is essentially a missile to nowhere that our troops will never be able to use in theater, and to transfer that money to the operations and maintenance funding for the troops so that we can make sure that there are resources that they can use to obviously make sure that they have what they need for the very best equipment and training, particularly in light of sequestration and what we are facing. And so at this time, I know that there's an agreement that's been trying to be worked out. I would hope that my amendment would be included in that agreement. And so at this time, I would ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment so that I may call up my amendment, Amendment 127.
Is there objection?
I object.
The objection is heard.
Thank you, Madam President.
Before the senator leaves the floor, I have listened to her speeches, most of them. She has been very articulate. I appreciate how she feels. She has some Democrats that agree with her. But the problem is we have this problem that it's hard to arrive at a list of amendments. I appreciate her intensity, and I don't in any way denigrate what she's been trying to do, but under the situation we find ourselves, I reluctantly objected.
So the fact that that money is really most likely still going to be spent on that program, and it's going to go into somebody's district, some congressional.
Yeah, no, that's who was fighting it. I mean, at the end of the day, a couple of districts trying to protect money that wasn't good for the nation,
right, and
wasn't going to be able to be used by our troops, and that's wrong.
Right. Well, if the military already says they don't want to use it, well, I mean, why would you even continue to go down that way?
It's pretty absurd.
Right. The other question I have on that regard is that the whole aspect of the budget, or the Senate not having a budget the last 4 years, that's a bit unusual, isn't it?
It is unusual in that by law, the Senate is required to produce a budget resolution. We're supposed to do that by mid-April. And by the way, as an aside, the president is supposed to submit his proposed budget to the Congress by the first week in February. He has yet to submit it. Both the House has gone through its budget process, the Senate has now gone through its budget process, and we have not seen the president's budget proposal yet. So this year, he's so late in submitting it that it becomes irrelevant to the process, unfortunately. But getting back to the Senate, it's 4 years of the law being ignored, and it's wrong. In fact, I've been so passionate about this issue, I co-sponsored the No Budget, No Pay bill. I introduced my own bill with a Democrat, actually, in last session that said we should not be able to do any legislation until we meet our responsibilities under the budget law. In other words, unless it's an emergency, nothing else other than let's get our budget done for the country. How are we ever going to get a hold of $17 trillion in debt if we don't prioritize spending? Think about it. Businesses, families, the state budget, you have to be able to look at it, balance your budget, use common sense, and none of that was happening in Washington.
Well, why was that? I mean, what excuses do the Democrats give you for that?
The excuse we got from Harry Reid last session was that it would be foolish for them to do a budget because, they were worried about election. And when you do a budget, you actually have to make choices, right? So you have to prioritize. This is something that's a priority to me. This is something I'd like to do, but I can't afford to do. And the fact that we haven't been making those choices is why the fiscal state of the country gets worse and worse. And so we are always better off. We've got to prioritize our spending, make sure that we understand things that are obsolete, like the missile of nowhere, done, get rid of it. Right. And we haven't been making those choices, and they need to be made. Well,
I guess that must be a foolish law because legally they have to submit a budget, as
yes.
you just said before. So.
Well, how about complying with the law? Common sense. I think most Americans understand how important a budget is for our country.
Well, especially the amount of debt we have, the fact that sequestration was looming over the horizon. So I guess that really tells you what the priority is.
Right. I mean, and I will say that we did do a budget this year. The Democrats just passed 50 to 49, the budget, the Senate budget that they proposed. That budget, unfortunately, has $1 trillion in tax increases in it. I did not support it. I did support the House budget that came over because that balances within the 10-year window. It's really important that we start making some decisions to get our country on the right fiscal track. I worry about, not only us, but what kind of country we're leaving for our children. And I'm the mother of a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and that's very motivating to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as taxes, that kind of leads us into the next clip we have, which is regarding the online sales tax.
Yes.
So let's take a look at that.
Madam President, I rise in opposition to the amendment I heard is going to be filed that's been called the Marketplace Fairness Act. I think we need to rename this legislative proposal for what it is, because what it is it's the Internet Tax Collection Act. And I come from a state, New Hampshire, that doesn't have a sales tax, nor do we have an income tax. And one of our famous governors said, low taxes are the result of low spending, and that's how we do it. But what essentially, there's been a lot of talk on the floor today about somehow how this Marketplace Fairness Act is about states' rights. This act, which is really should be named the Internet Tax Collection Act, infringes on the rights of my retailers in New Hampshire and businesses that have thrived and grown over something great called the Internet to collect, forcing them to become tax collectors for the rest of the nation. And in fact, they'd be forced to become tax collectors for nearly 10,000 tax jurisdictions across this country should this proposal go forward.
And as that clip shows, Senator Ayotte, the efforts to tax the internet is really a new tax, really.
Certainly some groups that have looked at it, Americans for Tax Reform, have called it a new tax. But what it really does, that's outrageous, truthfully, is that those that are pushing this online sales tax in Washington, what they want is to make New Hampshire businesses, but not just New Hampshire businesses, online businesses across this country, to become tax collectors for the rest of the nation. So what it means is that in New Hampshire, we don't have a sales tax. I'm very glad for that. We don't have an income tax. So a business in Illinois, if our online sellers, the internet, by the way, has been a great area of growth, great area of innovation. It's doing well, and of course, people see money in Washington and they want to grab it. So this would require our businesses to, if they sell to Illinois, to be a tax collector. I'm not kidding, for 9,500 state and local tax jurisdictions. So can you imagine being a business in New Hampshire, an online business, and having to collect for 9,500 tax jurisdictions? Since when did the federal government make decisions to allow states to outsource their taxing responsibilities to other businesses, to small businesses, many of them? And this is just so wrong. New Hampshire's made a choice not to have a sales tax, so it hits us even harder. But even states that have a sales tax, I mean, their businesses now are going to be tax collectors for the nation. And what that also means is that your online business, if you are doing business and you have to collect taxes for the nation, if you do any kind of internet business, which obviously goes beyond New Hampshire, then you're in a position where you could be audited in any one of those jurisdictions that you have a transaction. Can you imagine a business in New Hampshire being hauled in some court in some other state?
Right. I mean, the potential costs and the overhead for a small
It's a
region.
bureaucratic nightmare.
Right.
And it's a money grab from cash-strapped states that want the federal government to allow them to do this. It's wrong. I've been fighting against it. I'm going to continue to fight against it in Washington.
Well, when you look at the internet, it's almost like a industrial sector right now. I mean, you have healthcare, banking, manufacturing, home ownership.
Right.
The internet really, last year the internet sales just around Christmas alone were massive. I've got a relative that works for UPS. And the amount of volume that went through them, most of they contributed to, online sales is just tremendous.
There's so much commerce over the internet. I also have a separate bill that I'm a co-sponsor of, that I've been an original sponsor of, actually, to stop all potential internet taxes. I don't believe that we should be taxing the transactions, taxing the internet, because what we're going to do is hurt all the growth of new businesses on the internet. And I think it's an area where we're going to continue to see more economic activity that's good for this country, more jobs, greater growth, more people being successful. And so the last thing we want to do is put some onerous taxes on it to hurt it,
Right.
hurt the development of the internet.
And that's something that could be impact, the kids downloading iTunes. I know in healthcare, right now, a lot of hospitals and I'm in the healthcare industry, a lot of hospitals are using web-hosted solutions or iCloud, cloud solutions. So, that could open the door to other transactions being taxed as well, which is really, and right now it's not being taxed, and look, it's one of the
It's
fastest
great.
growing
And you know
areas.
what, you point out something good. We're doing a lot of great education, education's using the internet to bring into the classrooms opportunities to receive lectures and materials from people that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. So it's really a great thing, the internet. And when it's used properly, we also know that there are times when it's not used properly, and I dealt with that when I was Attorney General, but it's been a great economic growth engine.
One other question I have in that regard is the congressional pay freeze, which is another topic I know that you're very interested in. What are your
Yes.
efforts in that area?
Within the Budget Committee, I brought an amendment to the budget resolution that the way congressional pay increases work, first of all, they are automatically built in. Unless we disapprove our pay increase, the law is that there'd be an automatic pay increase. It's ridiculous. So at the beginning of this year, the president announced all types of proposed pay increases. Among them were members of Congress. So as soon as that happened, I introduced legislation to stop that pay increase. And then when we passed the continuing resolution, we did stop the pay increase for Congress this year. There will be no pay increase. But then when the budget resolution came forward, I introduced another amendment that got passed, and that amendment's straightforward. It basically says, while for the next 10 years, no pay increases while we're running a deficit. In my view, I don't think that Congress should even consider giving itself a pay increase while we're running a deficit. So I do not ever plan on accepting a pay increase while we're running a deficit, and so that may mean, I hope it doesn't mean, obviously while I'm in office, but we're running deficits every year, and what we should not get a pay increase. And think about the other people that are sacrificing this country right now, those that are subject to sequester and all that. Can you imagine? It's outrageous. We shouldn't get one. So that's been my efforts. It did get put into the budget resolution.
Good. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. No, the rest of the questions I have are kind of off the budget area. But one of the hot topics here in New Hampshire is the Second Amendment. And, I know that you're a Second Amendment supporter. What's your primary stance on the Second Amendment and gun rights?
Well, I certainly believe that it's important for us to respect our Constitution and to uphold our Constitution. And the Second Amendment is a very important amendment to our Constitution. It protects an individual's right to keep and bear arms. When you think about it, it's a very important right. And so I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And I also believe, having served as Attorney General, all of us are just so heartbroken over what happened in Connecticut. And yet, when we look at some of these horrific events, I don't believe that taking the rights away from law-abiding citizens is going to stop a criminal or a deranged person. And so we need to focus on making sure that we're enforcing our current laws, that people who are adjudicated, mentally ill and aren't supposed to have a firearm now, or felons and those, that's where the focus should be, not on infringing on the rights of law-abiding citizens. And I also happen to come from, a family. My husband, he goes to the local fishing game club, the National Fishing Game Club, and enjoys the recreation of shooting there and being in competitions and things like that. But also for self-defense, it's very important. Self-defense, I think sometimes that's overlooked, but it is really the probably core of the Second Amendment. Self-defense.
Right, and actually I think right now today the state legislature in New Hampshire is voting on one of the stand your ground laws, so it is a topic that's very...
The one thing I'll also add is that I do think that we should be looking at improving sort of what you see as an overriding theme in a lot of these horrific mass shooting situations are mental health issues. And I think we can, and I'm the co-sponsor of a bipartisan bill, to really look at our mental health system to get better training for people and make sure that we can identify those individuals sooner so that we're in a position to prevent them from committing these kinds of acts. I think we all want to work together on that, and it's important.
Yep, absolutely. Another question here. The Obama administration is using the HHS mandate to force the Catholic Church to offer health care services that are really directly opposed to the church doctrine. It's, in a way, it's almost equivalent to asking Jews to, eat pork or, Muslims to serve alcohol. It's just fundamentally opposed to them. My question is this: if the federal government believes that it has the right to dictate, these type of things to a religious organization, do we really have religious freedom in this country?
Well, I will certainly say this, that we just talked about the Second Amendment. This is about the First Amendment to the Constitution and respecting people's First Amendment rights with the exercise of their religion. And this is about the rights of conscience that have long been included in our laws, including, it's enjoyed in the past bipartisan support, support from President Clinton when he was in office, and so this has never been a partisan issue. Yet, under the Affordable Care Act and the President's health care law, there hasn't been full, robust protection for conscience rights. And so I think that is a very, very important issue that transcends every religion. And I would think it would be a deep concern to every American of making sure that we aren't forcing religious organizations to provide coverage that directly violates the tenets of their religion. And so I think this is a very important principle that I would hope, again, would enjoy bipartisan support, because this is the First Amendment to our Constitution, and we need to respect other people's religions, and we shouldn't have the government in a position of forcing people to do things in violation of their religion that normally we would allow a conscience clause provision to respect that, and historically we have, and that's what's disappointing about where we are now.
And one question, I know that you're on the, I think it's the Armed Services
I do. I serve on the Armed Services Committee. Yeah.
The whole topic of the incident in Benghazi, Libya, that took place in 2012, I know that you're something that I've heard you speak on this topic before. What would you tell the American people, or what do you think the American people really don't know about that incident that we ought to know? Because I don't really think, a lot of other news organizations don't want to have anything to do with that story. And that's incredibly frustrating to those folks. I know a lot of veterans in particular that are very frustrated about the fact that...
This is something that I feel strongly about. I think, having been a prosecutor, when I first learned about this incident and what information was being provided publicly, I thought there's something not right about this, and that's why I have been pursuing this in the Senate with my other colleagues. And I think the issue is this. Here you have 4 brave Americans, our ambassador included in that group, who were murdered during a terrorist attack. And I have to tell you, it's been like an unbelievable experience to get information about this to the American people. Initially, as you know, the administration tried to describe this as some kind of spontaneous reaction to a hateful video, and that's not true. We now know from having pushed for more information about it that it's not, that people, including the Secretary of Defense, knew from the beginning that it was a terrorist attack, and yet it was not described that way. So one of the things that has not yet been fully answered to my satisfaction is who changed the talking points that were put out? Why was this misrepresented to the American people? And that has not yet been answered fully, and certainly we've continued to push for answers on it, as has the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I think the American people deserve a straightforward explanation. But more importantly, we know that there were so many warning signs in Benghazi, and why was it that we didn't take action to secure our consulate or to make sure that our personnel were were taken out of there as other countries did sooner. There are many questions that are still, some have been answered, and I will say the questions that have been answered because we've continued to push for answers. It's not like someone is just out there giving us answers. Everything has been a fight to get an answer, and that's unfortunate. And so finally, the people that were there who are the victims, we have not, heard directly from them to make sure that we understand from their perspective what happened and how we can do things differently to avoid this. Ultimately, the goal is to make sure we never have another Benghazi. And the more we have the administration hiding facts and not being straightforward with us, the less we're able to get the information we need to assure that this doesn't happen again, because that's the ultimate goal. And I think that's important no matter what your party affiliation is, to get the truth when you have Americans that are murdered during a terrorist attack.
Now, are there more hearings on that topic that are coming up?
In the Senate, I don't know that there'll be further hearings. There's some additional inquiries that we'll probably make, but in the House of Representatives, I understand that there may be some additional hearings.
Okay. And we talked about the budget issues. We talked about a few other things. What else is on the agenda for you as far as future amendments or future legislation that you're working on, or topics or areas of focus?
Well, I think we talked about some important areas of focus. So continuing on the medical device tax, the online sales tax, ultimately also thinking about the fiscal state of the country. We're $17 trillion in debt. And we have programs like Medicare and Social Security that are going bankrupt. So Medicare 2024, according to the trustees, goes bankrupt. Social Security in 2033, bankrupt. And so the longer we put off actually working together to preserve those programs and to reform them in a way that protects the people that are relying on them, but makes sure that young people, that the programs are still there and they're financially sustainable, the more we're going to harm the country and the people that are relying on them. I see that as a big issue that needs to be addressed. And there are many in Congress that just don't want to address it because it's easier to score political points rather than solve the problem.
Well, those problems have been going on for a long, long time.
They have, but we get to a point where it's critical. I think we're at a critical point. You can't get to the point where you're $17 trillion in debt and you have these programs going bankrupt. You also have a position where you've been running $1 trillion deficits each year, and we've taken some important steps on spending, but there needs to be more done. And so ultimately, I think, coming up with addressing these larger fiscal issues is my number one concern, overriding everything, because whether it's the defense of our country or any other issue, if you continue with $17 trillion in debt, then at some point you can't meet the fundamental needs of what is well within our constitutional responsibilities, and I worry about that.
Well, Senator, I think we're probably going to have to stop there.
Thanks,
we
Ryan.
really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in and spending some time with us here in Hudson, and keep up the great job in Washington,
Well,
D.C.
thanks. I appreciate your having me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Take care.